absolutely. And I'm telling you what, this is more meaningful to me now that I've been studying the course for so long. Um, than when I first read it was I was pretty new, and it just was an interesting footnote. Just now it is almost revelatory, if you know what I mean.
It,
Whenever I
it
see
is.
these
It
things, I'm like,
is.
whoa, really, really? Oh, so
Speaking of revelation, I'm lifting the blinds so that our cat, who is wanting a little bit of visibility to the outside world of the dream space-time, can look out the office window. There you
oh
go.
yeah. Our cats look out the window. They watch the birds. They watch the other cats because there's a lot of other cats here. We
Uh-huh.
have another cat that suddenly just showed up one day, and first thing he did was come into the house through the cat door, which the feral cats never come in through the cat door. They don't know about how cat doors work.
Uh-huh.
So, I
Well,
knew
that's a good
this
thing.
this cat belonged to somebody. He was a pet, right?
Yeah.
But he's just appeared here. And so now we're under, of course, we feed him with all the other cats because we
Oh.
feed many neighborhood cats. We just put out food and they all come here, and we have little houses that we built for them, and well, houses. Like those storage containers, plastic storage container,
Uh-huh.
and we insulate it and put this little self-warming blanket in the bottom of it, and set it all up, and put a hole so they can go in and out. And a lot of cats come and hang out in those little huts, especially when it's cold. So I'm terribly allergic to cats.
Oh my. What a world we made for ourselves, huh?
I know, I can't believe it. It's like my life as a cat woman, and yet I'm like so totally allergic to cats.
Oh, that's funny.
It is a huge crack up. It just makes me laugh. Hang on, let me shut it all up. All right, I can hear myself on the radio. It means things are working the way they should. But yeah, that's how, it wouldn't matter what it was. If I decided that it was unnecessary, or I don't want it in my life, I'm going to get deluged with it. It's going to just show up and be everywhere because, that's how it works. What you resist persists, what you um, go against becomes the what rules you. And I
Making
just
it so many ways to make the dream real, huh?
yeah, yeah. So I just forgive, 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 forgive the whole idea, and it doesn't help with the I'm not a body because I'm sneezing. Um, and yet, I'm sure the lesson, even if you're sneezing, that's not you. That's not what I am. So, we just, we live with it and be joyful. So yeah. So let's look at, um, the where we are in the book. And if you want to start reading, that'd be great.
Sure, sure. I have us, like I say, about the just in the pretty close to the middle of the page 204 in the print version that I have. And absence from Felicity. So Ken is uh, in his commentary saying, far more difficult for Helen than the scribing itself, which, though distressing, went relatively smoothly and easily, was reading the notes to Bill the next day. They had agreed that at the end of the day, or whenever they could find time in what was then a very busy work schedule, Helen would dictate to Bill what had been dictated to her the previous day, and Bill would type it, as he jokingly remarked later, with one hand on Helen and the other on the typewriter. Try to calm her down.
Oh
Evidently,
no.
that's funny. I'd forgotten that remark. Yeah.
Yeah, she really honestly this was terrifying to her, and she was writing things she didn't know anything about. That's what that interview that she did. She's like, this is something I have no idea what this was. I didn't know anything about this, and so I'm writing these things, and it must have been really kind of uh, uh, fearful to her to
Well,
be writing things down that she didn't really know.
yeah,
But of course, you have to recognize, man, that means that there is really something beyond our conscious mind that um, actually is flowing through us and flowing through her, and it was frightening for her. So,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so let's see. So let's turn the page. Okay, you
Okay.
want to continue, or you want me to read?
Sure, sure. I'll go ahead. Um, so Helen now comments in response to Ken's comment about the one hand on Helen and the other on the typewriter. Um, Helen says, I hated to hear what I had taken down. I was sure it would be incoherent, foolish, and meaningless. On the other hand, I was likely to be unexpectedly and deeply moved and would suddenly burst into tears. I could never tell in advance when this would happen, and the uncertainty added to my already intense anxiety. Bill was extremely supportive, particularly during the earlier transcriptions, which were very difficult for both of us. It'd take me a long time, sometimes even hours, to be able to read intelligibly. Getting a single page typed was a real achievement and a very exhausting one. I could hardly read the notes aloud at all. I began to stutter, a problem I had neither before nor since. I also suffered acute coughing attacks and went on prolonged yawning jags, making it all but impossible for me to speak long or clearly. Sometimes I lost my voice entirely. Then Bill comments, excuse me, Ken comments, Bill would then read back to Helen what he had just typed, and this served as a check against possible mistakes. Bill, and then Helen continues, Bill's original typing was continuous, except that he started each day's typing on a fresh page, which he dated. Later, we both reread the whole thing and agreed that this method seemed to break up the actual content. It did not reflect the more natural breaks in the material, which seemed to fall into more natural patterns. We therefore noted down what seemed to be the more logical subdivisions and still later inserted chapter titles and subheadings, which, like the material itself, came to me very quickly and easily once I had agreed to put them in. Then I retyped the manuscript myself, in brackets. Actually, Helen typed the text twice, close bracket, which was not too difficult for me. However, I could not read it afterwards without great discomfort, so Bill agreed to do the proofreading, and we corrected my typographical errors together. The only actual changes we made in the original were to omit some highly personal references, which had been originally included toward the beginning, and then in brackets, as indicated above, Jesus had so instructed Helen and Bill, close bracket. Afterwards, the wording became more impersonal, and we felt that the material could be reproduced just as it had been taken down. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I think that kind of corroborates what those of us who've been studying for a while um, recognize that the published version from Foundation of Inner Peace really reflects not editing the content, but the form to make it clear, just in the same way that any author would want, um, their final polished manuscript to be published, and the rough drafts, which the urtext presumably represents, may be of interest to some, and but the content really is essentially the same. So, but why not read the the polished version and not have to trip
polished
over?
version.
There's enough things that people claim to find objectionable in terms of gender-like pronouns and iambic pentameter and Shakespearean blank verse and just the general nature of the writing itself. But like Ken Wapnick says elsewhere, probably in this book too, he says, the real issue that people have is they want to ignore, deny, or otherwise distort the content because they may not be ready for it, right? And or there's just enormous resistance to it, and that's okay. But um, the course really is completely consistent in terms of its content, if not uh, the form.
And you know what's really funny about all that is that the ones who are the folks who are wanting to change things or put things back or whatever are demonstrating the exact thing that Jesus is talking about, is that, you know, inability to this desire to be right
Uh-huh.
and the inability to accept things as they are. Um, you know, the thought and idea. So a lot of people, just in these particular things that we're talking about here, the highly personal references that Helen removed or Helen and Bill removed,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure that Jesus was, you know, directing them each single one. You know, is this personal? Is that personal? Is this You know, I'm not sure about that. And so, you know, a lot of people are. Thinking that they should have left the stuff in about sex and they should have left the stuff in about, you know, just all the different uh, issues that they were having personally during the scribing, you know, that was relevant and helpful to us. And it could be that it was relevant and helpful to us, but it doesn't change the message of the
Right.
course.
Right.
It doesn't make the message of the course more more coherent, or you know, if you learn to forgive the body, if you learn to forgive your ideas about the world, your thoughts about attack and grievance, if you learn to forgive those things, then all that other stuff just falls into place. So you know, it's I think it's neither one or the other. I don't think you know, people that are adamant about the Urtext or the sparkly edition or the original edition, or you know, all these different versions of a course, what their um, objections are an exact example of, you know, what the course is teaching us to overcome. You know,
Or at
the
least overlook.
overlook, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
overlook.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it's interesting that the arguments always typically center around some issue about form, but you know, the content is really what everyone's ego objects to, and I think that's really kind of more at the heart of, you know, that, and those objections really masquerade as uh, objections about form.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you know, if you, as you know, Ken famously said, and I do agree, you know, you could be reading the phone book.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Exactly.
if you're reading it with the Holy Spirit and you're seeing the truth that's behind it all, uh,
Hmm.
then you know, it wouldn't matter what it was. But you know, you have your purists, and you know, we can all be claiming that. You know, I could be claimed to be a FIP purist. You know, that's the way I think the book should be. But you know, there's no should be about it.
Yeah, I mean, if the message gets through, what matter does the form takes? You know, if someone was born before the mid '70s when the course came out, you know, they could have figured this out. Might have been a little more challenging in some ways. Just I find it incredibly helpful that this distilled wisdom and profound psycho-spiritual insight, you know, anthology is available to us now in 27 plus languages, and and that's pretty cool, you know, that, you know, the whole world has access to a system of undoing the belief in separation that is really very extremely coherent and not only inspiring but brilliant at the same time in terms of its the depth and breadth of what it covers, and the universality of its message.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, because it's actually talking to the ego. You know, you know, it's not talking to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit already knows all this stuff.
Right. It's talking to the
So,
decision-making mind
right.
that thinks the ego is still a legitimate option, or you know, a usable, workable option for finding peace. And
Yeah.
I keep coming back to something that Ken said about lesson 182 when I listened to it over and over for a year. He says, you know, the purpose of the course isn't to make us miserable. The purposes of the course is to show us how miserable we've made ourselves by using that decision-making faculty in our mind to choose a thought system of insanity, which we call ego, and which imprisons us by projecting the insanity of the sin, guilt, fear thought system onto the world in a an unworkable attempt to try to get rid of that guilt in the mind. And the more we look at that honestly, the more we realize the whole thing is just it's just a crazy misunderstanding that we can undo by forgiveness.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. And if we could, if that was the only, if we actually got that, then it would be just so simple. But of course, simplicity is of spirit and complexity is of the ego. So
Uh-huh.
we got the complex world that is showing us a completely different and valid reasons why
Hmm.
they're right, why the world is right, why my ego is right.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So
Would you rather
uh
be right or happy though? That's that the question comes to mind, isn't it?
exactly, exactly. And he asks us that so many times in so many ways. And of course, it's hard to hear it because of course the ego thinks, well, if I'm right, I'm happy. That's what makes me happy is being right.
Sure it does.
Never
Yeah,
want to be
right.
so miserable. But anyway, oh my gosh. Okay. So I'll read on a bit. Uh well, in fact, I'm going to ask you to read on because I just heard somebody in the other room. I need to go
Oh,
do
sure.
something real quick.
Sure. Okay.
So,
All
uh
right. I'll pick up where we left off on
okay.
middle of page 205 now. And this is Ken's commentary, where he says, it was clear to Helen that though she was hearing one, she was the one hearing Jesus's voice, the scribing was, in the words of the Course, a collaborative venture, in quotes. As Helen wrote later, quote, much of its significance, I am sure, lies in that, end quote. Indeed, the major theme of A Course in Miracles is forgiveness, one definition of which might be two people formally separated by their ego perceptions joining together in a common interest. Helen and Bill's agreeing to help each other find the better way of relating symbolized this joining, and the Course represented Jesus' answer to their request. However, Helen and Bill not only shared their desire for the better way, but their anxiety over this way as well. One can only imagine that that's pretty likely scenario given everyone's mixed minds, a split mind of thinking that we're separate, but no, understanding at some deep level that that couldn't be right. Okay, so Helen continues. Bill and I had many discussions about the odd kind of double bind in which I found myself. Nor was Bill without similar conflicts. He had to deal with his own problems of disbelief and my fairly constant panic states. Surely a discouraging combination. To add to his difficulties, he recognized that I could not continue without his support and active encouragement, which were hard to offer consistently in the face of his own uncertainties. And yet it no more occurred to him to drop the whole matter than it seriously occurred to me. We seemed to be fulfilling a joint assignment which we both felt was important to continue in spite of our wildly contradictory feelings. Well, it's good that they felt it was important to continue for all of us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be reading this together right now, right? Yeah. Okay. And I'll continue now with Ken's commentary. Bill later referred to this joint agreement as a quote, sacred trust, unquote, that he and Helen felt had been given to them and which they knew they would honor. Well, so glad they did, because again, we're enjoying the fruits of that little willingness to continue with receiving the message. Helen continued, however, to find herself in a paradoxical situation. She still consciously clung to her avowed professional atheistic position, yet certainly could not deny what and who was involved with ascribing, with what and who in italics. Helen came to refer to A Course in Miracles as her life's work. yet disturbingly found herself in the impossible situation of professing not to believe in it, quote, a situation as ridiculous as it was painful, unquote. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, the context of that is, they're professional, prestigious positions at Columbia Presbyterian University in New York City, and they're high positions that required the empirical mindset of can't don't don't try to convince me of anything that I can't measure with the instruments of science, basically that kind of thinking, right? Of course, we're measuring illusion with illusion, but nevertheless, there's still a tendency to enthrone science as a yet another replacement to the capital G God of the course. The ego, of course, can use uh, religious uh, religions based on sin, guilt, and fear, uh, and any permutations of anything that's a mix of the truth that nothing happened, and that the pure non-dual eternal innocence of our one being uh, that is mixed with something that's a compromise of that. So, anyway. Are you back, Lynn?
I am back, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Do
So,
you any
okay.
comments on what you just read?
Yes. You didn't finish reading this paragraph, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Oh,
So,
oh, okay.
a situation as ridiculous as it was painful, and yet, as Bill once pointed out to Helen in regard to Jesus, you must believe in him, if only because you are arguing with him so much. And
Yes.
that's it. That's what we're doing. You know,
Hmm.
we're arguing with the ego. We must believe in it because we're arguing with it. We must believe that the world is a bad place because we're arguing with it. We must believe that all these different things, we're giving it its reality by uh by having a conversation with it.
Yep. Yep. And as you're saying that, I was thinking that the only way you can deny something is you have to at one time, at least momentarily, have considered the idea in order to deny it.
That's right.
And the
Yeah.
course presents that in a number of ways.
Yeah, and yeah, the course does present that in many ways, and that's what, we really have to look at is, our denial, whatever we're denying, take a look at it and ask why. Why am I, denying? And of course, that last unanswered question, do I want to see what I denied because it was the truth?
Hmm.
Even after Jesus asked us, do you want to be happy? Do you want to have everything you ever wanted? Do you want to live forever? Do you want all these questions? Yes, 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 yes. Do you want to see? Do I want to know what I denied because it was the truth?
Hmm.
Because that's the same question.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
same question.
Yep.
So, the logic is so clear. And, I can just imagine being, well, we're told we argue with ourselves all the time. We argue
Hmm.
with the thoughts in our mind all the time.
Yep.
So, I can understand it is clear, why we're so confused. Um, and I like that, Helen realized that that was that's her purpose was to be here to scribe this course. But of course, her real purpose was to recognize the truth about what she is, recognize the truth about what God is and what the world is. And, from what I understand through her life, even though she knew it was true, she didn't want to believe it. So, I think that's a famous quote. I know it's true. I don't believe it, or I don't want to believe it. Um,
Hmm.
but there we are.
Yeah,
That's
and Judy Sketch-Whitson apparently was there when Helen uttered that remark. That she said, "I know it's true." Hopefully, I'm not paraphrasing too much, but Helen said, "I know it's true," referring to the course. I just don't believe it. Um, and Judy, not missing a beat, apparently said something, knowing about the resistance that not only Helen had to the material, but all of us have, which we were talking about earlier. said, Helen, shouldn't it really be? I know it's true. I just won't believe it because that kind of correctly acknowledges our implicit resistance to uh, letting the truth in and working with it on the level that it's presented, which is always about changing teachers in our decision-making mind.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And being open-minded, that's one
Hmm.
of the that's the last characteristic of the teachers of God is
Yeah,
open-mindedness,
yeah.
is to be willing to be shown, to see what I'm being asked to see.
Yep.
So yeah, it's just perfect. So I will read on if you want.
Sure, sure.
Okay. So Helen continues. Uh, as for me, I could neither account for nor reconcile my obviously inconsistent attitudes. On the one hand, I still regarded myself officially an atheist, resented the material I was taking down, and was strongly impelled to attack it and prove it wrong. On the other hand, I spent considerable time in taking it down and later in dictating it to Bill, so that it was quite apparent that I also took it quite seriously. It was apparent I also took it quite seriously, and that could be said about Lynn reading the course. You know, I've spent a lot of time reading it. I spent a lot of time talking about it. I spent a lot of time looking at it. But does it move my life? And at first, it did to an extent, but my resistance was so strong. Now, I actually, I can see it moving in my life. So I don't have to be so resistant of it. I just know that it's true and it's working. And it will work if I let it work. You know,
Hmm.
it works if you work it.
Right, right.
So so Ken says, it is clear, however, from Helen's letters during this period, not to mention her notes prior to the course, that her faith was very strong and that her belief in Jesus was quite tangible. It was also clear that the conflict she was experiencing was totally internal. Uh, and it just reminds me of a this is way back when I was in the seventh grade. They showed us a movie at school called Sally and Saint Anne. Now, you have to understand, I went to a Catholic school.
Okay.
So, Sally and Saint Anne. Sally was a young girl. She was in a Catholic school. She was about our age and she was resistant, and she was doing all the things that, young teenage or preteen girls, wanted to do, wear lipstick, put their hair up, all that. All the stuff. Um, oh gosh, I have to call her back. That's my sister.
Oh,
Um, anyway, so Sally goes through a lot of things and starts getting into trouble, and she's complaining to Jesus about all, why is this and why is that and why do you do this and why did you do that, and one of the nuns at the school said, such a heretic. And the other nun said, such faith, you know.
that's funny.
And I remember that always, such faith. And I realized that when we are being, uh, when we're arguing with God, arguing with Jesus, telling him, hey, no, you're wrong. Don't do this to me. Don't ask me to do this. That's faith. If we didn't have faith that he was really there listening or had a thought about it, we wouldn't bother talking to him about it.
Hmm.
So, it always stuck with me from seventh grade, that no matter what trouble Sally got into, and of course, Saint Anne, who is Jesus's grandmother, shows up to her. She appears to her and helps her work through her teenage troubles, which is another thing that was pretty cool because I realized I thought, saints can appear to me and tell me things. So that was that was a good thing. But
Even adolescents, huh?
Even adolescents, even me who's, refusing to go to confession or, whatever it is that they're, Saint Anne is right there for me, Jesus's grandmother. And one time I had an actual vision that I was Jesus's grandmother. I actually had a vision of watching Jesus and Mary and Joseph with their little son, my grandson, and being so joyful at this beautiful little boy. And I don't know if it was, a dream, a vision, whatever, while I was meditating and I didn't ask for it. I wasn't looking for, tell me, let me see Jesus as a little kid. It just came to me. So, I kind of think, that someone said to me, "Oh, but you must have been Saint Anne in your past life." Like, I don't think so. But, I could have been Jesus's grandma. Who knows?
Well, if there's just one of us, then we've all been everything, right?
We were
So
all Jesus. We were all Saint Thomas. We were
exactly.
all these people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so I was just looking through her eyes, apparently. So anyway, let us then continue reading. So Helen says, external circumstances were surprisingly favorable. The writing was apparently timed so as to cause minimal disruption, and in spite of his own conflicts, Bill offered me consistent positive reactions and remarkably sustained support. Oh, I wanted to mention something here that what we were reading just before this about how she would take down things and she would take them in and he would type them up, starting with a new paper every day,
Hmm.
and realizing that those were not actually the where things should be, yeah,
The natural
stopped and
chapter and section breaks, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Hmm.
not at all. I mean, what Helen heard was a continuous um, uh, writing. It wasn't,
Almost like a transcript of a recording.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
yeah. So you could turn it off. You could turn it off in the middle of a sentence
Hmm.
and turn it back on in the middle of that sentence and finish the
Hmm.
sentence.
Yep.
So that was what was happening with her. And so, it didn't necessarily mean that that's where the natural breaks were, where she ended for the day or started for the next day.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking the metaphor is that, for each of us, trying to begin to generalize as I like to do, that I find it really helpful, and hopefully it's helpful to everyone else, is, we can pick up wherever we left off with our own highly individualized curriculum with the Holy Spirit at any moment. There's no time that's a bad time to resume listening to that voice of forgiveness and correction in our mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's,
and it,
it's
and every
continuous.
yeah, and every moment is the optimal moment to resume that connection and that receptivity.
And not a note in heaven's song was missed.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Pretty interesting. Yeah. I was just reading the clarification of terms. We have a group at night on Thursdays and
Uh-huh.
we finished the manual for teachers and the clarification of terms, and we're going into the psychotherapy pamphlet now. And he does mention about, will we resume the song where we stopped before,
Yeah.
and not, there was no, the whole the whole illusion here, the whole story of the dream is just like a little parenthesis in the middle of it, a
Mm-hmm.
little ellipse or something in the middle of it. And it's just there and gone.
Yep.
It's over.
Huh, interesting.
And we're singing in the choir eternal again. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, however, as psychologists, Helen and Bill could certainly explain Helen's most peculiar situation of fighting against what, on another level, she obviously believed in. They understood the dynamic of dissociation, wherein one splits apart the two parts of the self that are in seeming conflict, thereby allowing them to continue to coexist in the mind. The two selves, of course, are the parts of the mind containing the thoughts of the ego and the Holy Spirit. When brought together, the ego must vanish, just as darkness disappears in the presence of light. Therefore, the ego's defensive system protects its thought of fear by dissociating the love that threatens its existence.
Hmm.
That's a very
Bingo.
thing, yeah, that
Yeah.
dissociation.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
yeah,
Ken has commented in a number of places that, the course, the timing of the course was just impeccable in terms of what needed to be widely disseminated culturally, maybe not, the whole planet being aware of it, but certainly a significant portion of the populace at least having direct or indirect influence of the work of Freud, because his psychology, which really formed the basis of what Helen and Bill were doing, was, certainly if not at the forefront, certainly a predominant influence in what they were doing academically and professionally, but also it really forms a tremendous portion of the foundation of the course's psychological underpinnings, and that ideas like resistance and projection and dissociation, those kinds of things are hugely important to the course's metaphysical ideas.
yeah. I mean, they were living it in their real life and
Hmm.
seeing the examples of it
Oh yeah, I mean
every day.
we're all living laboratories of the course's process of forgiveness, and each of us gets to look at our own seemingly separate self, or silly seemingly separate self, as I like to say, as our personal laboratory to watch how our mind can be transformed by the ideas
Yeah,
in the course. Yeah.
exactly. And it's this is a terrible uh uh story. It really upset me actually when I read it, but I've seen things like this before. Um, of an experiment that they did with mice where they put them in water in a tube where they couldn't climb out. All they could do was swim around. And they
Hmm.
would swim around they until they, for a certain period of time until they were just exhausted. And then the researcher would pluck them out of there and dry them off and, feed them and give them, help them out and everything. And then put them back in. And when they first did it, it was only a couple hours that they were just, done. They were exhausted and uh and after they were pulled out and fed and dried and saved and everything, they put them back in. They dropped them back in the water and then they had to swim some more. And interestingly enough, they swum basically until they were exhausted 66 hours on
Oh,
average.
oh my gosh.
66
That's
hours.
that's a lot of dog paddling for a
Yeah,
mouse.
for a little mouse, yeah. And it's horrific to think about them doing these things.
Oh,
I'm just like,
sure.
it just makes me
Yeah.
sick to think about it. But that also points out that this is how we are.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
we're so curious that we will go to any lengths to find an answer. How long does it take for an animal to give up? And the point of the thing the person was posting was that, if after we have given up completely and we are refreshed, we can turn back with uh, a new, uh, whatever energy to keep going, and we can keep going much longer because we know eventually we're going to be plucked out of there and saved, or
Hmm.
we have the faith or belief that that's going to happen, and that it was is true of how we are as egos, as humans. We are kind of that way. But it also pointed out to me the incessant curiosity of the ego to understand itself and understand what its boundaries are.
Hmm.
That's what led us here. That's what gave us this world of dreams. That's what gave us, all the fear and suffering and sickness that we seem to have. We have a desire to see how far we can go. How far can I run away from God before, I get exhausted? And how far can I run away, until I have faith that I'm going to be saved. It's the same thing. The ego's defensive system dissociates its experience from the truth of what it is.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. Yeah.
so, that and you can see it. We do it so much. I think about, in fact, when I was younger, one of the ways that I uh, gave before I knew anything about this course, before I heard anybody say any of these words, anything like this, I thought about Hitler a lot. And I thought about, how could he have done those things? And how could all those people that worked with him have done those terrible, terrible things to these people? And it's like the people with the mice in the tubes. It's like they wanted to see how far they could go. They wanted to see the stretch the limits. They wanted to, how can we break these people and their resolve to remain alive. And you have people like Viktor Frankl who went through that and came out stronger and greater than what he had gone through or what he had been before. In a way their experiment worked, in a way that their experiment showed us the how far we would go, the limits that we would uh, go to prove that God doesn't exist.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know. It's just interesting to me. And when I understood that, when I actually this is something that came to me during one of my mini LSD acid trips, actually, was that it wasn't like they were the evil empire trying to do evil things. It was just that relentless curiosity to see how far we could go, that and we do in humans do in all ways. Why we went to the moon, why we're trying to go to Mars, why we want to go to the bottom of the ocean, why do we want to go, starve people to death, how far can we go? How far can we go? And that's the ego testing
Right.
its own metal.
And the whole, again, science and religion and so many other approaches to trying to make the dream work, if they are disconnected or divorced from, what the Holy Spirit is trying to, teach, are just doomed to fail because there's nothing in the world that uh, can be redeemed other than using every specific thing as a forgiveness classroom. Last night, my wife and I watched the movie Poor Things that just came out recently. Have you
I
seen it yet?
love that movie.
Yeah, and it really highlights the importance of uh, the the ego saying, "Well, I want empirical evidence for," and that word was used a couple of times by the main character. Uh, that I was like, well, you know, and the fact that there's this sort of a Frankenstein story was with the idea of uh, science can be somehow harnessed to fix the ills of the world. Well, all it really demonstrated was that that they just resurface in different forms, but it's still the same insanity. And but I thought it was interesting that the clarity at the beginning of the story that the main character Bella had was in that she wasn't um, the cultural underpinnings weren't and mores and all those things weren't established. So it was almost like an equivalent of being able to look at the ego thought system without having it immediately whisked away and suppressed and denied and projected. Um, so it was real obvious that the ego's thought system is an insane, murderous, conflicted thought system, and how could it be anything but that? Because it was born out of the idea of conflict, the idea of duality, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that movie was really, if you haven't seen it, throw away, stop thinking any thoughts about social mores and things because you're going to be shocked if you if you haven't seen things like this. But the whole point of the movie being that the scientist himself had been experimented on by his own father, who was that curiosity, what would happen if I, removed my child's pancreas or whatever. I mean, he did horrific experiments to his own child. And the
Hmm.
guy grew up to be a scientist also, who was, experimenting with everything. And he took this experiment of taking the body of a full-grown woman and implanting, I'm spoiling the movie for
Spoiler
you.
alert.
Spoiler alert,
Do la la la
implanting
la la if you
the
haven't seen the movie
the
yet.
brain of an unborn child into this body of this full-grown woman,
Right.
which they made it look like you could just pop it out and pop a new one in,
Yeah,
which
just
a little bit
yeah,
of
might be a little bit of a surgical a magic happens here kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, no, yeah, obviously it's an allegory. So
But it definitely an art film and a very well crafted one. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But the fact that now this innocent being who has no social constructs, no mores, nothing in the body of a full-grown woman, and is learning about the world from that point of view, rather than, and of course in the beginning they show her, trying to learn how to walk and, all the different things that, a newborn child or a small child would have to go through. But throughout the entire all the adventures that she went on, which she did go on some interesting adventures, she was just completely innocent because she didn't have the story of what the world thinks in her mind. She just thought, that she was just doing what was natural. And of course, that's horrific to a lot of people to see that. They don't want to see that kind of thing. But to me, it was just a beautiful allegory of, what the uncorrupted mind, what the uncorrupted being would be if it didn't have all the stories.
Uh-huh.
And so I loved it. I loved all the characters and I loved everything about that movie. Of course, it was beautiful to look at. Um, but I know a lot of people didn't.
Aside from a little gore.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There was some pretty awful stuff that happened. Crazy
Yeah.
stuff.
And just yeah.
And in the end, the bad guy gets to be a goat. So
Yeah, okay. Total spoiler alert.
a total spoiler alert. But of course, it's like an Island of Dr. Moreau
Yeah,
versus
yeah, yeah.
Frankenstein is,
Uh-huh.
just all that stuff. And
Yeah, yeah.
and just it was
But if you're looking for it, you can see the insanity of the ego, and yet another, well-crafted movie. But highlighting how if what I got from it was a reminder that I just have to stop and look and see how crazy my immature, um, wild, and examined ego motivations basically sabotage my peace.
yeah,
And that all the characters then represent aspects of my mind that are just exposed for the insanity of every aspect of the ego. For what it is. It's just uh, the pure selfishness is insane, and there's sort of a little redemption at the end where her character, the protagonist character, basically recognizes that there is some hope for kindness kind of thing, and at least that's kind of what I got from it
yeah,
anyway.
I did.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I saw her completely as an kind of an avatar,
yeah,
and at the end, that it really, again, what we would be like if we didn't experience guilt,
yeah, yeah.
if we weren't conflicted with guilt, had never been told or shown or thought,
Right,
that anything that we did was sinful or wrong.
right.
And of course, they took the most sinful thing that they could think of and made absolute parody of it, I think.
Oh, for
It was
sure,
just,
for sure.
it
Yeah,
just was
yeah,
like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
that everything about I could go on about that movie.
Yeah, looking at the previews, I had no idea there was going to be so many sexual references and
Yeah,
examples, but at the same time, it was done with complete tongue in cheek. I thought, as far as just a parrot, like you say, a parody of all the things that no ego wants to look at, and the pure selfishness of every aspect of the ego's approach to everything, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, so I could go on about this because in fact I think that would be a great movie watchers movie for Course in
Yeah.
Miracles students because there's just so much
Yeah, I
there.
think
And
so.
of course, when I'm saying that, people are, oh, it's a spiritual movie. No, it is not.
Well,
It is,
it is in the sense that I as in the same way that A Course in Miracles, um, people say, well, God, there's so much about the ego. Well, yeah, because that's what we're identified with. And until we look at that and see it clearly, and the exposure, essentially uh, taking off the emperor's clothing, in this case, literally as well as metaphorically, uh, is a way to see that every ego is insane, and it just wants what it wants at the expense of everyone else and everything else. And just seeing that adorned and you know, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Just, unsanitized.
yeah,
It is really, I think, is kind of a refreshing way to see that, everything that the ego has to offer is crazy. And of course, A Miracles really comes, doesn't use that metaphor. And like you were pointing out earlier, the and I think it's in chapter 2, in fact, that it talks about physical impulses, which was actually a more generalized phrase that was replaced the original. I think in the text it was sexual impulses,
uh-huh.
but that actually, if you think about it, any physical impulse is really ascribing to the body an ability it doesn't have. But that's a more general way of saying that anything that you think is going to make you happy in the world isn't in the world. And in fact, if you're using ego's motivation and thinking to try to achieve happiness, it's never going to work.
Yeah,
Whether it's an amorous tryst with a physical partner, or it's just something in the world, just generalize it to whether it's sex, drugs, rock and roll, or food, or the next uh, well, I'll speak for myself, that I've moved a few times in the last few decades, and just there's always a thing. Well, gee, this move now will have everything, sorted away the way we want it, and yada yada. But there's always stuff that comes up,
yeah.
that even in the desert, I spent an hour pulling weeds, and it was otherwise it's pretty dry climate last night. Not that it's a big problem here, but it's like there's always stuff to deal with.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my gosh. And it's something you just said reminded me, and I know we're almost to the end of our time already,
yeah, yeah.
but that during in that movie, during everything all the escapades that were going on, the scientist, Willem Dafoe, I thought was brilliant
Oh, yeah, yeah,
as
yeah,
the scientist.
yeah.
He
Well,
just
all the
basically
portrayals were brilliantly acted. Yeah,
yeah, brilliantly. But when the young man was like, oh, we should stop her, or thinking, and the scientist like, no, just let her go. Let's see what happens. Just let her go. And that's how God is too. Just go on, see what happens. You think this is going to satisfy you, this is going to make you happy. This is the thing about God. God is so free with us because he knows we can't be harmed. That he lets us do whatever we want, even though he's not aware of what we're dreaming. He's not worried about, coming into the dream to rescue us because there's no need. We don't need rescuing. And that was again how the girl Bella was in the movie. She didn't need rescuing at any point.
right, right.
She took care of herself.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
I love it. Okay, let's see. Okay. Do you have to go to anything
Well, I have another meeting I'll
right
be
after this?
attending about a couple of minutes, but yeah. So
Okay,
maybe we should just put a little bookmark there,
put a little
a-
bookmark.
and uh, and pick up where we left off next week with
Sounds good.
the
Yeah.
chapter
Every time I
7
read
account. Yeah.
Yeah. Every time I read Columbia Presbyterian, I always think that's a religious institution.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, and when I was a kid, my folks took us to the Presbyterian Church in Livermore, California, and so the association comes up, and then I think about how um, when I was a teenager, my mom uh, decided that there was something missing, and I think largely as a result, and this is another story in itself, but she saw what looked like a fleet of objects in the sky flying very, very fast and making an abrupt right angle turn over Catalina Island. She said if it was a hallucination, it was a mass hallucination because she said her peripheral vision showed everyone's heads turning at the same time, watching these things, and then all kind of shrugging their shoulders. And, like after they disappeared, it's like, well, what was that? So I think that kind of got her into not only UFO studies but also metaphysics in general, and so when the empty nests stage of her life began, when I was close to going off to college. That's when she started questioning the churches that she was dragging us around to, and I thought I went along for the ride and read quite a few of the books that eventually occupied more than two bedrooms in her house,
Wow.
which included the three volumes of A Course in Miracles. So anyway, well,
Exactly.
again, thank you so much, Lynn. I always enjoy our conversations and look forward to picking up next week where we left off.
All right, my dear, I love you so much. And I'm
Likewise.
so grateful for you. And I'm glad you're back. And
Yeah, yeah,
I'm glad you ha had a great time with your family. So
yeah. I really did, really did.
we
Yeah,
all need to do that. Take some time.
yeah,
All
yeah.